Well, I've mentioned the Phantasy Star series a few times already, so it's about time I put my macetas where my mouth is. Back in the 80s, Wizardry and Ultima would make role-playing games the hottest nerd thing around the world. Not just in their home countries, but also in Japan. As Nintendo and Sega had their console wars, various companies would bring their own flavors of RPG to the competing systems. Nintendo rolled the jackpot when NX started the Dragon Quest series and would eventually roll the jackpot once more with Squaresoft's Final Fantasy. While the Famicom scored these big names, before 1988 the Master System had... Miracle Warriors? Yeah, Miracle Warriors, everyone remembers that game, right? It came with a little figure, and it had succubus titties on the cover. So, yeah. Sega decided to step up their game in this department. They gathered a team of veterans and began working on their master plan. It wasn't going to be just another RPG. No, they were aiming higher. They were aiming at the stars. The Phantasy Stars. Yes, with PH instead of an F. You got a problem with that, nerd? While the majority of RPGs had some sort of standard fantasy setting, Phantasy Star instead mixes fantasy with science fiction of the space variety. Sometimes you have swords, sometimes you have laser guns, sometimes you have vampires, sometimes you have robots, sometimes you have wizards, sometimes you have... copyright infringement. Back in the day, this setting wasn't a common sight in console role-playing games, and in fact was quite novel, but it certainly wasn't the first. Just 2 months before Phantasy Star had been released in Japan, Hot Bananas released Hoshio Miruhito on the Famicom. Phantasy Star might as well have been the first though, because this game is a pile of shit. Somewhat interestingly, Phantasy Star actually came first for the Western world, not Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy. Phantasy Star's Japanese release was on the 20th of December of 1987, about a year and a half after Dragon Quest and a mere 2 days after Final Fantasy. However, Phantasy Star's Western release was in November of 1988, while Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy would only be seen in 1989 and 1990 respectively. The story begins on the planet of Palma. In her hometown of Caminite, Alice, the protagonist, watches her brother Nero suffer the consequences of breaking the law. The world is governed by a man named Vasek, who Nero claims is leading the world to destruction. He tried to put an end to his plans, but yeah, it didn't go very well. With her brother's parting words, Alice swears vengeance on Vasek. So off she goes on her merry adventure through the colorful star system of Algo, filled with fun times, adventure, treasure, and new friends. Joining Alice on her jolly quest is Meow, the magical talking cat, Odin, the non-magical Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Noah, the magical magic user. For the most part, Phantasy Star plays like a standard dungeon crawler. While you do spend quite a bit of time on the top-down overworld, the main part of the gameplay involves exploring dungeons in first person. In fact, this was one of the main selling points of the game, because this is 1988 and the dungeon's pseudo 3D effect combined with the detailed animated sprites looked really friggin' awesome back then. Remember that the competition on the NES looked like this. Embarrassing. That's not its only technological advantage, but I'll have to go armchair historian again. This is the Sega Mark III, the Asian exclusive predecessor to the Sega Master System released in 1985. It uses an old PSG sound chip created by Texas Instruments, the SN76489, which was also used in a whole lot of other hardware from that time. In 1987, Sega released the FM Sound Unit, an add-on featuring the Yamaha YM2413, one fancy bastard of a sound chip. This granted it more advanced music and sound, in a kinda sort of situation similar to game cartridges with built-in expansion chips. In fact, the YM2413 is quite similar to Konami's VRC7 chip, prominently featured in Lagrange Point, a Famicom game released 4 years later. However, the Western version of the Sega Master System was first released in 1986, way before the FM Sound Unit was on stores. This is because the Master System was intended to be the Western equivalent of the Mark III, and indeed it was only released in Japan in 1987. The thing is, the Japanese Master System comes with the FM sound unit built in, while the Western hardware never got anything. Kinda sort of like the game cartridges with built-in expansion chips. Some things never change. Anyway, the battle system is rather straightforward. Characters take turns performing their actions, which can be regular attacks or magic. Only one type of enemy ever shows up during combat, but they can appear in groups of up to 8. Melee weapons attack one enemy, which in old school RPG fashion is picked at random, and the firearms hit every enemy for a fixed amount of unblockable damage. There's also a talk command that allows allies to try and talk to the enemies, but frankly it's pretty useless. You can use it to instantly end battles against a handful of enemy types, but for the most part you can safely give it a very stern middle finger. The dungeon exploration isn't quite as simple thanks to their complex layouts. The closer you get to the end of the game, the more complicated it gets, with multiple floors linked with each other at various places. Corridors get corridorier, turns get turnier, and getting lost gets getting lostier. There's no minimap or any of that sort of bollocks, so you have to draw your own maps on some paper or look them up online. But it's not all doom and gloom, and with enough persistence you may be rewarded with some very special treasure. Conversations take place in first person, again demonstrating how nice Phantasy Star looks with its colorful and detailed sprite work. Like you'd expect from an RPG, talking to people can earn you some useful information or even important items. Naturally, you also have shops where you can buy various things. Some of those things are essential for progressing the story, most notably the vehicles. You have the hovercraft, which can cross over water and lava, the ice digger, which can break through solid ice on the Zoris, and then there's the Land Rover, which lets you run over those stupid antlions on Motavia. And yes, I did just mention other planets you can visit, which is kind of cool considering one of them is an ice planet. Please clap. But not everything is sunshine and lollipops. Despite being technologically impressive, the dungeons all look the same. Every single dungeon is a maze of Legos without a single landmark to help you take note of where you are and whether you have already been through this corridor that happens to be identical to the other 50 corridors. There is also a secret wall passage right before the final battle, which you can easily miss and end up wandering around a seemingly closed off area for half an hour. The problem here is that the door is located halfway through a corridor and it doesn't show up unless you're directly facing it. This is the only time in the entire game where this happens, so you probably won't even think about checking this bit of the wall. Sure, this is likely because of technical limitations, but it's still frustrating as balls. Then there's the treasure chests dropped by enemies. Similar to the dungeon crawlers it takes inspiration from, enemies don't drop goodies instantly. Instead, you get the choice to open a treasure chest, which of course might have a trap. Most dungeon crawlers usually have some sort of thief class that can detect traps, but the only option here is to cast a spell and spend your limited MP supply. It also adds a couple of annoyances. Ignoring the chests isn't always an option since you need money to buy some items required to progress in the game. And for some reason, when you have a yes or no choice, both face buttons work the same, so you can't just mash buttons to cancel it and get on with your life and get a stable job and maybe find happiness. The final annoyance is that certain enemies drop an item called Flash, which is used to light up dark dungeons. It's not uncommon to discover your inventory infested with these bastards, and dropping them has to be done one by one. As a final kick in the balls, halfway through the game you can get an item that does the same thing but can be used as much as you want, rendering the flashes completely friggin' useless. The combat balance and mechanics have some quirks too. There's something weird going on with defense and enemy attack power. It seems like there's some sort of scaling in place because even with the best equipment in the game, the weakest enemies in the game can still deal more than 1 point of damage. Suffice to say, seeing a stupid fly do as much damage as a dragon is just sad. Your party's physical attacks also vary to a ridiculous degree, going all the way from 1 to about 40 with the strongest weapons. I'm guessing that the game uses some sort of multiple hits system where it calculates multiple individual strikes and checks if they were successful or not, despite the status screen only showing a flat number. There's also a clear discrepancy between your party members. Alice is mostly a physical fighter with solid attack and defense stats and a few basic support spells. Meow is a powerhouse that dishes out physical damage while also being able to cast the ever useful Cure spell. Noah is the dedicated spellcaster, but unfortunately random encounters are very common, offensive magic is more than a bit underwhelming, and maximum MP values are so low that you're better off spending it on Cure. Noah still does alright with physical attacks anyway. Then there's Odin, who can't use magic but is supposed to be the big and strong musclehead. Except for the fact that his base stats are all lower than the rest of the party. Well done, Mr. Schwarzenegger. Well done. His strongest physical weapon only puts him on the same level of damage as Alice and Meow, so his best weapon might be the laser gun, the strongest firearm in the game, and also the only one that doesn't suck balls. It only does 20 damage, while late game enemies have several times that, but at least it never misses and hits every enemy. Finally, there are the animations. The unskippable animations, especially when you're fighting large groups of enemies. Yes, thank you, that's a very nice animation. I have only watched it 1,000 times in the past 5 nanoseconds and I'm just dying to watch it another 1,000 times. We're also entering highly subjective territory here, but I actually like the PSG soundtrack better overall, while some FM renditions almost sound like an afterthought. To be fair, some of these problems are due to the game being a product of its time, and I feel somewhat uncomfortable slamming it this hard because of it, but I have to point them out regardless. It's still worth checking out this classic. There really wasn't much like it back on release day, and while it probably isn't going to wow anyone today, it's still, you know, fun. However, many people would recommend you play the fan translation. The official release is serviceable, but the fan translation is much more polished and accurate to the original script, names and terminology. It also has the option to switch between the original audio and the FM version, so that's groovy. Phantasy Star would eventually be ported to multiple systems. It got a reprint for the Mega Drive, which apparently was a prize from some contest at first, but fans asked for it, so they gave it a regular retail release, or something along those lines. It's unique in that it's not exactly a Mega Drive port of the game. The cartridge contains the exact same game and simply instructs the console to run it in Mark III compatibility mode. Unfortunately, because the Mega Drive doesn't feature the FM sound chip, it only plays PSG sound. The game appeared in a variety of other releases. The most notable one is the Japan-exclusive Phantasy Star Complete Collection for the PlayStation 2, released in 2008. This release was volume 32 of the SEGA HS2500 series and celebrated Phantasy Star's 20th anniversary. And buckle up, because it's time for me to be an armchair historian one more time. The SEGA HS brand was used for re-releases, ports and compilations of classic SEGA games. Its first iteration was aimed at the Sega Saturn, with several volumes released between 1996 and 1998, including ports of arcade titles such as Outrun and Space Harrier. Most relevant to this video is Phantasy Star Collection, which compiles the classic mainline titles. Then in 2003, Sega introduced Sega HS2500 for the PlayStation 2, a partnership between Sega and D3 Publisher. This lineup of 33 volumes was focused on low-budget remakes and compilations. In fact, that's where it gets its name from. All volumes were priced at 2,500 yen. And keep that name in mind because it will be relevant again in a few minutes. Complete Collection includes all the classic Phantasy Star games, both the mainline titles and the side stories. It even includes the official English releases, and comes with a whole bunch of extra options to make your life less miserable while playing through Phantasy Star 2. Jesus Christ, that game is a chore. Phantasy Star Collection for the Game Boy Advance got released in America and Europe, but not Japan. It includes only the first 3 mainline titles, which leaves me wondering if the developers were either complete assholes or complete morons, because the artwork on the title screen was ripped straight from Phantasy Star 4. And no, that's not Alice. Recently, Sega also announced the port for the Nintendo Switch, in a new set of Sega H's brand releases. New features include a bestiary, a list of items and magic, difficulty settings, and an auto-map function, likely making this the most accessible version of the game. Phantasy Star got a turn on cell phones too, getting ported to old Java-compatible phones as Phantasy Star Deluxe Edition. The gameplay remains mostly the same, but the visual department had to undergo a very noticeable downgrade due to technical limitations. The dungeons are still smooth, but everything else just jumps from one frame to the other. On the bright side, the interface is much faster. The removal of animated sprites is a shame, but characters and cutscenes got completely redone artwork to compensate. Alice also starts with higher stats, which cuts those first few minutes of grinding before you stop getting murdered by flies. It features an auto-map inside dungeons too. I'd still recommend sticking to any of the original version's releases though. If you want a different, more modern experience, then rejoice! To kick off the Sega H's 2500 series, they decided to give Phantasy Star a complete remake. Generation 1 basically takes the original game and gives it a modern facelift in pretty much every aspect. The gameplay, the graphics, the music. The story is still the same, but there's much more dialogue this time around. Start this sucker up and you get the good old scene of Nero dying after being a naughty boy. Right off the bat you can see the expanded dialogue and the character portraits, adding some extra personality to your previously bare-bones party. There's also a party chat option, adding extra flavor text and reminding you of what you're supposed to do next. In fact, Generation 1 gives the player more guidance in regards to where they are supposed to go next. On the other hand, these graphics are not exactly bleeding edge like the original game. It was inevitable since this is a budget game after all. Still, I think they are mostly alright and do their job of being visually appealing, aside from the ugly menus. Enemies are still animated, but now your party gets the same treatment, mimicking Phantasy Star 2 and 4. Just a shame that animations remain unskippable, so battles still take a bit longer than I would have liked. You've probably noticed that there are different types of enemies in a single battle now. I guess it's time to talk about the remade combat system, but frankly I don't really have anything particularly interesting to say about it. I specifically said that this remake gave Phantasy Star a modern facelift, and that's because it literally is just that. Whereas the original played like the average dungeon crawler from its era, the combat in this remake plays like the average turn-based JRPG from the mid-2000s. Or from before that too. And after that as well. Your party members can perform basic physical attacks, cast magic, or use the new collab system. The talk command was removed, but really who cares? Basic attacks can target any enemy and weapons have been reworked, with firearms no longer dealing fixed damage and certain weapons striking twice. There are a few new magic spells available to both the player and the enemies, such as a healing spell that targets the entire party. As for the collab system, it sounds like it would be some sort of combination attack between party members, kind of like Phantasy Star 4. But brace for disappointment because it's nothing of the sort. Your party members can equip 2 gems, which can be bought in Kamnit and let the user cast a specific spell, even Odin. By themselves they are pretty much useless, but combined you can unleash a powerful special attack. The downside is that the gems have a chance to break after use, so you might want to save them for boss battles. The problem is that the random encounter rate is very high and most bosses are complete pushovers anyway, so I found that the best option is to just equip 2 heal gems, which restore a percentage of the character's HP after every turn. In fact, after I discovered this, I realized that I could coast through the vast majority of battles by just selecting the auto battle command. Still, all these changes add some welcome variety to combat. In the original game, only a select few enemies had any sort of special attack and there were no elemental resistances or weaknesses, so enemies were almost all the exact same aside from their HP and attack power. Party balance is also better. Characters have clearly defined roles and are all equally useful. Alice remains the balanced attacker with some support magic, Meow traded some physical stats for even more magical goodness, Odin is now the physical powerhouse he is supposed to be, and Noah has a variety of different spells that can be used generously thanks to the increased MP maximums. Another change is the addition of an item called the Atlas, which temporarily displays an automap on the screen, making dungeon exploration a lot easier. I always got the impression that fans were never too fond of this remake, and while that might just be confirmation bias, I have to disagree. A classic like Phantasy Star deserves a higher budget remake, but all things considered, Generation 1 is an improvement in most areas. The only real downgrade is some of the music, using some rather cheap sounding instruments. Some tracks like the battle theme are great, but the majority is either alright at best or unfitting at worst. The Palma overworld theme went from energetic to whatever this is. Motavia is a desolate desert planet infested with antlions, and the theme music is this fast-paced high-tech track. But anyway, yeah, Generation 1, it's pretty cool. I'd say it's superior to the original, but if this video made you interested in checking out Phantasy Star, you should at least try out the original version before checking out the remake, because it really is a different experience. Just make sure you get the updated translation patch.